Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the glory of God and his kingdom. Well, one of the glories of God, in my estimation, is our friend Rod Martin. Rod is a free-range mind, a man of considerable entrepreneurial experience, notably back in the day when he worked with Peter Thiel in the standing up of PayPal. He has also been a policy advisor to then Governor Mike Huckabee, who's gone on to great things in our embassy in Jerusalem. But Rod is also, among other things, the chairman of the Institute for the American Future, which makes this program possible, for which we are also very grateful, as well as an emerging influencer with his Rod Martin reports, which you can find at rodmartin.org, and I strongly urge you to do so. Rod, a lot to talk with you about. Much of it is now featured prominently on rodmartin.org. But welcome back. It's good to have you. Happy Thanksgiving to you, my friend.
It's always good to be here. Happy Thanksgiving to you, too.
You are one of those for whom I am particularly thankful, I must say, every single day. Let me ask you, Rod, to talk a little bit about a piece that you've just posted as we speak on rodmartin.org about what the United States under President Donald J. Trump is trying to do to bring about an end to the war in Ukraine, and how it's going as you see it at the moment.
Well, I'm kind of marveling at the reaction because people ought to know better. I mean, it's exactly the reaction Trump was seeking to produce, but some of the quarters from which it's coming just boggle my mind, like Newt Gingrich, who cast it as a betrayal of Ukraine. And everybody in the world should understand this less than Newt. Newt actually gets how this works, and he's still flummoxed. The truth is, this is just Trump's negotiating style. The 28-point plan is not acceptable as it stands, period. Can't possibly be signed by the Ukrainians. Doesn't matter. The point is, we finally got Putin to agree to something concrete, and you make this big maximalist open, which Trump always does, and he's only been telling you that he does it since 1987 in The Art of the Deal, and in countless books since, and in a #1 TV show, every way he possibly can telegraph this, and he's just doing what he does. So we've got Putin on record agreeing to something that we all know is gonna happen. There's no way that Ukraine can push them completely out of Ukraine's pre-2014 borders. That is simply not going to happen without the U.S. Army. So we're not sending the Army. They're not going to be able to push Russia completely out. So now you're just dickering about details. And the details here are actually pretty great as long as you look at them with broad brush rather than looking at the extreme specifics. So, for example, NATO is forbidden to ever allow Ukraine in. Ukraine is forbidden to ever allow itself to seek NATO membership. This is an absolute red line for Russia. At the same time, we get to continue arming them, training them, and we give them basically an Article 5 guarantee. If Russia invades, it's to be treated as an attack on the United States and Great Britain and France.
Okay.
This is everything.
Let me stop you there, Rod, because that's a neuralgic point for an awful lot of people who consider themselves part of Donald Trump's base. Does this trouble you that we're proposing to convey to the Ukrainians that kind of security guarantee? Sir?
No, there's some form of this that's inevitable. There's no way for Ukraine to survive if that doesn't exist, because Putin will just come back. So you've got to have some kind of line drawn where this peace is actually semi-permanent versus a 2-year truce. So that is the way to do it. You give them sort of an Article 5 light deal, and at the same time, you guarantee that they're never part of NATO, which means that you don't have a German army within 2 days marching distance of Red Square. And that's always been the Russian red line. Now, we badly handled this under Biden, and all of what we're talking about really could have been accomplished by negotiating, but the Biden team was, somewhere between goading them into a war and brain dead. This wasn't hard. All that had to happen here was, and I'm not saying Russia didn't want more, I'm just saying that the bare minimum necessary to get their situation squared away, to get their geopolitical imperatives met, to actually have a workable peace, is that Ukraine be Finlandized. And one of the great ironies of this war is that Putin managed to de-Finlandize Finland and Sweden. And so now you have 2 new NATO allies who had been neutral for basically ever, and that's just stupid. And also an incredibly long border with Russia that we didn't have before from a NATO perspective, which is not a good thing from Russia's point of view, but there's absolutely no way to undo it either. I mean, this is the reality Putin now has to live with, just like what we were talking about last week with regard to Trump detaching the South Caucasus from them, making inroads in Central Asia, getting these key Chinese companies to quit buying Russian oil. Everywhere, Putin's situation is being diminished in meaningful ways. They've lost a tremendous amount of their refining capacity, their production capacity. They're just in a world of hurt. And I think that's what brought them to the table. Trump has accepted as an opening proposal something that, again, is maximalist. Ukraine's going to push back. That's the idea. And then you go back to Putin and you say, look, we can agree on 80% of this, but we're going to have to tinker with this other 20. And eventually you get to a deal.
But Rod, let me just come back to this question. If we wind up making a commitment to Ukraine's security that is akin to what we have with treaty allies, doesn't that create essentially the same issue for Putin that he would have had they been part of NATO in the first place? And what does it mean in terms of the distinct possibility that we'll be drawn into conflict there in the future, given that Putin's appetite for conquest is probably not slackened entirely?
No, it's meaningfully different, and the reason, and Putin agreed to it, which tells you he thinks it's meaningfully different.
Well, let me just ask you, is that evident? Because it sounds as though the Russians are still, not saying they've agreed to, the first version of the 28-point plan, let alone what's evolving.
They are going to leave themselves maximum negotiating flexibility, as they always have in all eras whatsoever, but they've basically signed off on this. Now, what is the difference? The difference is, if you're going to put together a NATO invasion army to go take Moscow and subjugate the Russian heartland, you're a long way from the Russian heartland if you're still in Poland. So Ukraine becomes a buffer state. It becomes, what Finland used to be. And you don't have to worry about, remember the Russian point of view on this, if you had a German army, and Germany is a pretty key component of NATO, if you had a German army in Kharkov, you've basically reversed the outcome of World War II. There's just an emotional thing to that is absolutely unacceptable. But giving them a guarantee is a different thing, because the truth is Russia can't invade NATO. They can't.
Hold the thought, Rod. We have to take a break. We'll be right back with more with Rod Martin. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Rod Martin is with us, one of our sponsors as the chairman of the Institute for the American Future. You can find out more about the work of that organization at usfuture.org. You can also find out a lot more about Rod Martin's thinking on a whole host of things at rodmartin.org. especially check out his Rod Martin report. And Rod, we could go on for a whole nother block here and not usefully probably cover all of the points of the 28 plan, or whatever it is now, 27 points, 26. The main one is, I guess, that we're going to be watching this thing further evolve in the days to come, and we'll want to take stock with you on how you think it's sorting in terms of the Trump deal-making strategies, and whether we're getting to yes in a way that will be constructive and enduring. But I did want to talk with you about another thing that you've highlighted in your Rod Martin report, and that is a new technical revolution in the energy sector that promises to make the United States even more energy dominant than President Trump had envisioned when he took office the second time. Give us an update on what's involved here and how people can learn more about it from you.
Well, they certainly need to come to rodmartin.org and read about this. It's really quite remarkable. We spent most of our lifetimes listening to leftists tell us about peak oil, which was complete nonsense from the beginning. First of all, because we had so-called peak oil again and again and again over the prior century, and they were always wrong. Production always increased, and the reason is that when prices increase, there's more incentive for innovation, always. And so people come up with new ways to produce the stuff. The idea that this is just, this shallow pool of dead dinosaurs does not stack up with the geology. That's a fantasy from fifth grade. That's not where we are. There's an incredible amount of oil, much deeper in places that we never dreamed of 30, 40 years ago. And the fracking revolution proved that. Now, what has happened? Well, fracking is incredibly efficient. So you start depleting the pools that you're accessing through horizontal drilling and the normal fracking process. What has happened is ExxonMobil in particular, Chevron to a lesser degree, have looked at the landscape and said, how could we make this better? And so they've actually found a waste product called petcoke, which works as a proppant. You shoot it into the shale, and it will travel much further because it's lighter, and it will hold open the shale at a much greater distance from the wellhead. And so you can access massively more gas and oil in the same wells, and certainly in new ones, than ever before. It's basically another shale revolution all over again. It will put tremendous new life into a lot of existing wells. It will open up new possibilities in countless places, and it just means we're gonna pump up U.S. production like you simply can't believe. We're going to be the dominant player in this market.
From your lips to God's ears. I'm aware of a couple of other technologies, by the way, that I think offer that promise as well, and it's very exciting to think that at a time when we're hearing not so much about peak oil from the left, but we're hearing about the imperative need to abandon fossil fuels, that we're finding them in greater and greater abundance, and the arguments for abandoning them become more and more absurd, especially at the expense of, not just human prosperity, but even survival in some countries. I'm thinking particularly of places like, the Netherlands and Sri Lanka, which have suffered terribly at the hands of these leftists, no?
Oh, absolutely. Look, the greatest driver of poverty on earth is the lack of reliable energy. And there's nothing reliable about renewables. If you really want solar to take off, you need to put it in the desert, but you still have a base load issue. Ideally, you'd put it in orbit. And that could be a really cool solution. It's also a really expensive solution right now. It won't be after Starship really gathers steam, but right now that's not viable. So what do you have? Well, you have exactly what China is emphasizing. Yeah, they're doing renewables, but only enough to fool Westerners into buying their windmill blades and their solar panels and so forth. It's all hooey. They're building more nuclear plants and coal plants than you can count. They're absolutely operating on sources of energy that add to the base load, that are absolutely stable and reliable, come what may, doesn't matter what the weather is, doesn't matter what time of day, and that is the solution. So that solution, expanding oil and gas production in particular, and we're just dominant in gas. If you do that and you add a bunch of nuclear, which this administration is making possible, all of a sudden you have a transformed economy. The GDP growth is going to be phenomenal 3, 4, 5 years out. And all of that comes from a combination of prices causing innovation and regulation being slashed so that government isn't in the way of it. That's what's happening, and it is going to be revolutionary. We used to be dependent on our enemies. We used to basically, in 2008, we were exporting, if you can call it that, $700 billion a year to petro-states that hated us. Now that money's coming into the United States and creating jobs here. It's daylight and dark different, and it just changes the security picture for the whole world.
Yeah, praise God. Rod, let me turn to a domestic legal matter in our closing couple of minutes with you. You trained as a lawyer. I know you don't practice the law, but you follow it closely and help explicate for us what's going on in some of these recent court rulings. Specifically, I'm thinking of the one in which a federal judge has essentially snuffed, I guess, at least temporarily, the indictments of James Comey and Letitia James, people who are invariably reported to be enemies of President Trump, whom he is trying to punish through lawfare. What are we to make of the ruling by this judge, and do you think that's the final word on it, sir?
It is absolutely not the final word. First of all, these indictments were dismissed without prejudice, which means they can be refiled, they can be appealed, whatever. Even if they had been dismissed with prejudice, they could be appealed. What is the basis of the dismissal? Well, it's not that they're the president's political enemies or whatever, although this is a Clinton judge, so there's no question that there is political bias on the bench. That's not the point. The point is that the dismissal is based on what the judge found to be the illegal appointment of the U.S. attorney who brought the indictments. Well, I think that's completely bogus, and I think on appeal we will find that that's bogus. But even if not, DOJ is just going to refile these.
And so in the end, will we likely see either on appeal or on some other basis, the prosecution going forward of James Comey is of particular interest, not least because what he has done, it seems to me, is not just lied to Congress, but engaged in a massive conspiracy against the president. That's, I guess, a matter for another day with successive indictments that are in the offing. But we're anxious to make sure that justice is served here, given the extensive criminality in which this former director of the FBI apparently engaged in. Rob, we have to leave it at that. I'm afraid we are, again, out of time. It flies when we're having fun with you. Come back soon, and a very happy Thanksgiving to you, my friend. God bless you.
And to you.
We'll be right back, folks. Stay tuned.